In the investigation of every suspicious phenomenon which, as it so often happened, came my way. This property, newly formed in me after this event, when I, of course, with the cooperation of our all-common master, the merciless Hero-Pass, that is, the flow of time, was transformed into the young man already depicted by me, became for me a real inextinguishable hearth, always burning, of consciousness. The second of the mentioned vivifying factors, this time for the complete fusion of my dear grandmother's injunction with all the data constituting my general individuality, was the totality of impressions received from information I chanced to acquire concerning the event which took place here among us on earth, showing the origin of that principle which, as it turned out, according to the elucidations of a Mr. Allan Kardec during an absolutely secret spiritualistic seance, subsequently became everywhere among beings similar to ourselves, arising and existing on all the other planets of our great universe, one of the chief life principles. The formulation in the words of this new all-universal principle of living is as follows: if you go on a spree, then go the whole hog, including the postage. As this principle, now already universal, arose on that same planet on which you too arose, and on which moreover you exist almost always on a bed of roses and frequently dance the fox-trot, I consider I have no right to withhold from you the information known to me, elucidating certain details of the arising of just that universal principle. Soon after the definite inculcation into my nature of the said new inherency, that is, the unaccountable striving to elucidate the real reasons for the arising of all sorts of actual facts, on my first arrival in the heart of Russia, the city of Moscow, where, finding nothing else for the satisfaction of my psychic needs, I occupied myself with the investigation of human legends and sayings. I once happened, whether accidentally or as a result of some objective sequence according to a law I do not know, to learn by the way the following. Once upon a time a certain Russian, who in external appearance was to those around him a simple merchant, had to go from his provincial town on some business or other to this second capital of Russia, the city of Moscow, and his son, his favorite one because he resembled only his mother, asked him to bring back a certain book. When this great unconscious author of the all-universal principle of living arrived in Moscow, he, together with a friend of his, became, as was and still is usual there, blind drunk on genuine Russian vodka. And when these two inhabitants of this most great contemporary grouping of biped-breathing creatures had drunk the proper number of glasses of this Russian blessing, and were discussing what is called public education, with which question it has long been customary always to begin one's conversation, then our merchant suddenly remembered by association his dear son's request, and decided to set off at once to a bookshop with his friend to buy the book. In the shop, the merchant, looking through the book he had asked for and which the salesman handed him, asked its price. The salesman replied that the book was 60 kopecks. Noticing that the price marked on the cover of the book was only 45 kopecks, our merchant first began pondering in a strange manner, in general unusual for Russians, and afterwards making a certain movement of his shoulders, straightening himself up almost like a pillar and throwing out his chest like an officer of the guards, said, after a little pause, very quietly, but with an intonation in his voice expressing great authority, "But it is marked 45 kopecks. Why do you ask 60? Thereupon the salesman, making, as is said, the oleaginous face proper to all salesmen, replied that the book indeed cost only 45 kopecks, but had to be sold at 60 because 15 kopecks were added for postage. After this reply, our Russian merchant, who was perplexed by these two quite contradictory but obviously clearly reconcilable facts, it was visible that something began to proceed in him, and, gazing up at the ceiling, he again pondered, this time like an English professor who has invented a capsule for castor oil, and then suddenly turned to his friend and delivered himself for the first time on earth of the verbal formulation which, expressing in its essence an indubitable objective truth, has since assumed the character of a saying. And he then put it to his friend as follows: "Never mind, old fellow, we'll take the book. Anyway, we're on a spree today, and if you go on a spree, then go the whole hog, including the postage. As for me, unfortunately doomed while still living to experience the delights of hell, as soon as I had cognized all this, something very strange, that I have never experienced before or since, immediately began and for a rather long time continued to proceed in me. It was as if all kinds of, as contemporary evidences say, competitive races began to proceed in me between all the various sourced associations and experiences usually occurring in me. At the same time, in the whole region of my spine, there began a strong, almost unbearable itch, and a colic in the very center of my solar plexus, also unbearable. And all this, that is, these dual, mutually stimulating sensations, after the lapse of some time, suddenly were replaced by such a peaceful inner condition as I experienced in later life once only, when the ceremony of the great initiation into the brotherhood of the originators of making butter from air was performed over me. And later, when I, that is, this something unknown of mine, which in ancient times one crank, called by those around him, as we now also call such persons, a learned man, defined as a relatively transferable arising depending on the quality of the functioning of thought, feeling, and organic automatism. And according to the definition of another also ancient and renowned learned man, the Arabian Mal-el-Lel, which definition, by the way, was in the course of time borrowed and repeated in a different way by a no less renowned and learned Greek Xenophon, the compound result of consciousness, subconsciousness, and instinct. So when this same I, in this condition, turned my dazed attention inside myself, then firstly, it very clearly constated that everything, even to each single word, elucidating this quotation that has become an all-universal life principle, became transformed in me into some special cosmic substance, and merging with the data already crystallized in me long ago from the behest of my deceased grandmother, changed these data into a something. And this something, flowing everywhere through my entirety, settled forever in each atom composing this entirety of mine. And secondly, this, my ill-fated I, there and then definitely felt, and with an impulse of submission, became conscious of this, for me, sad fact, that already from that moment I should willy-nilly have to manifest myself always and in everything, without exception, according to this inherency formed in me, not in accordance with the laws of heredity, nor even by the influence of surrounding circumstances, but arising in my entirety